Hi, I'm Scott for ediblemusic.com. My friend, it's time for you to try using analog style EQ plugins and to discover what they can bring to your mixing results. If you're just getting started with analog style EQ plugins or you have some hesitance about using them, I want you to bring to mind and compare how you're already using EQ with a graphic spectrum display and see the similarities that that actually has to the analog style EQ plugins that I'll show you. These include a visual representation of the program as it's playing through, but as you're making your decisions with it, figuring out where to add an EQ filter, how much gain or attenuation to adjust, the quality factor of the bandwidth, you're making those decisions with your ears. So having that frequency spectrum display is useful, but is it crucial? Do you absolutely need it? Not really. In fact, when you're making EQ decisions on graphic display EQs like this one here, they already function very similarly to how analog style EQ plugins because their design draws from the design of those analog units. Check this out. For example, the filter shape of an EQ as you're adding gain or attenuating it, that shape is modeled after the way that analog EQs function. It's a little bit broader at unity, but closer to the peaks or to the valleys of the EQ filter, it starts to narrow so that you can have a more natural sounding EQ curve. That is exactly how analog EQs function as well. Similarly, the way you might sweep around a little in order to find the right placement for your EQ filter, you can do that on analog EQ plugins as well. The difference is that some analog EQ plugins don't allow you the freedom to just roam around the frequency spectrum with your EQ filter, searching out problems or trying to find the problem that you hear. Sometimes the EQ filter settings are stepped, so you'll click into these distinct frequency areas and you have to choose from those instead of searching around. But so much of what you do with a EQ that has a graphic display transfers very readily over to analog EQ plugins. There are a lot to choose from out there, and I'm just going to show you a few. I would love to know which ones you are experimenting with or which ones you would like to try out using. I'm always up for exploring more new plugins that are out there. Let me know which analog style EQ plugins you're using. These ones that I'm going to be using here, say we boost up the low end here, you only have four options: 20 hertz, 30 hertz, 60, or 100. And then you can attenuate just around those frequencies to focus that frequency choice that you've made. Sort of like the dips that you might add on a display EQ. So in one sense, you might think, oh, I only have these four options to choose from. That's very limiting. But if you only have four options to choose from, it's very freeing, I find. You only have to choose from those and then you're done and it sounds great. This kick sound already sounded good. It feels nice to bring up some of that low end to really give it some power. But if you're working with a full drum kit, for example, you might want to sweep around a bit. Here, these filters are also stepped, so that sweeping habit you might have is more of a stepping habit, is what it would come to. So that limitation I find is kind of a nice one, but you also have a lot of flexibility with analog EQ plugins. You can see here you have 4 filter options. You have a high pass filter, low, mids, and highs. Sure, the high is set to 12, but 4 is plenty. If you compare again with how you might use EQ on with a spectrum display, usually you can get a lot of EQ work done with just 2 or 3 or 4 filters, and you're all good. And the exact same kinds of filters that you might use would suit you here too. Let's say if you want to do a high pass, you can do that. Don't really need to here on the full kit. And high shelf. That stepped filter method is also how you would use API style EQs. I'll show you with this synth here. Again, it has 4 filters, but it has a little bit more flexibility with those. As you can see, the low filter and the high filter, you can turn those into either shelves or bells. There is a vast distance between the frequency selections you can choose. And they all fit together. They fit around each other. You can see this low mid contains 5, 7, 1K, whereas the high mids contain 8, 1.5, and so on. So if you need to do a boost, but you also need to do a cut very near to it, you can make those middle frequency filters to work together. The way that I recommend to do it is to start with the low frequency filter, then do the high frequency filter, make adjustments around the edges of the sound first, and then you can use those middle filters together in relation to each other in order to make the changes that you might find necessary. For this track, I think it sounds pretty good. I might just do a dip here at 240. Yeah. Now, it's true that having only these options to choose from, frequency-wise, might feel restraining, but if the decision-making part of mixing is overwhelming and you're not sure where to EQ and how much you're supposed to do on a certain part in order to bring out the fullness of the sound or to remove some of the distracting parts of the sound, then this might actually be really helpful. It might eliminate that overwhelming sense when you're looking at an enormous graphic display and you only have options to choose from. Again, like the example earlier, if I'm going to add some low end to a kick, then I'm only choosing from either 60 hertz or 100 hertz. That kind of simplifies the decision quite a bit, don't you think? So with these designs, the workflow is more about switching between options rather than sweeping around back and forth. It is an adjustment in workflow, but if that appeals to you, then I think that it'll work out really nicely for you to get involved using some analog style EQ plugins. And you can still boost up quite a lot here to 12 just to test which filters might sound right to you. You'll notice that the different options, there might be one that kind of seems to catch the frequencies of that sound better than others, and that will tell you, oh, this is a good one to use. Alternatively, if it exposes some negative aspects of the sound, then that will be a choice to cut there. Just like that. And the result of their being designed this way is that if you have an API equalizer, for example, on every single track, then it acts like you have an API mixing desk. And all of these frequency switches will actually end up sort of puzzle piecing together and fitting the program together. But if you want to maintain that freedom of being able to select whatever frequencies you need in order to be able to attenuate or extenuate them, then try out using an SSL style, because that stepped feature of Neve style, API style EQs is gone, and you can just sweep around to find the frequency that you need. So still, it removes that visual aspect of graphic display equalizers with a frequency spectrum presentation on there. But like I said, you don't necessarily need it. This is a really great way to sort of force yourself into monitoring how EQ changes the sound of a program element. Now you know how to approach using analog style EQ plugins. As you get more comfortable with them, you'll find that they can be a really efficient way to get a nice mix balance and to get the program elements in the mix fitted together in a really nice way. And it helps you to learn how to monitor your mix using these guys, your ears. This is what I talk about in a learning series that I developed called the 5-Day Foundation. It shows you how to approach EQ, but also how EQ fits together with the other processing that you'll perform, with compression, with saturation, with delay and reverb. All of these are part of the mixing process, and so I've staged them out over the course of 5 days, giving you a lot of information, but also information that is practical and applicable that you can use right away. Get started on that. Join me there at ediblemusic.com/5days. See you there.